I don't know.
We'll talk it through. As always, I do my best to support whoever arrives on the call. I will certainly do my best. It runs on so many different levels.
Yeah.
And like all serious matters, there's not a solution per se. There's just a solution for you.
Yeah.
The forces at play are so great and so far beyond the control of the individual. It's a collective, and there's a consciousness that's playing through the collective. And so humanity is behaving in a certain way that's reflective of that collective consciousness. You understand? It's like it's a herd, it's a pack, it's 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 the individual choices that are creating a group response. And so there was enough in a collective to provoke an attack. There's enough in a collective to orchestrate a retaliation. There's a tit for tat within a collective construct that has been going on for eternity. And it seems content to continue in that vein. And so we can't affect directly through actions per se the events of a collective that has been locked, embroiled in an endless conflict, not through a protest or through a letter or through, but what we can do is care for those around us. We can care for our own well-being, and we can expand our vibration to do our best to shift the collective consciousness into a higher vibrational state that doesn't tolerate acts of violence.
But how can I do that? I'm one person. Like, how?
Well, so that is the journey of one person. Because if enough one persons are doing it, then you start to get a shift planetarily. I'll explain to, actually, Chris is going to be a little bit late, so we can just, hi,
I can
Cricket.
wait until he comes and then
No. Why don't we just talk? So I think the call is primarily to support you right now, just because of what you're experiencing. And then certainly Cricket and Chris can participate. And so it will just be us for now.
Okay.
Yeah. But why don't you tell me a little bit of what you've been experiencing, and then we can move through the process of your own personal events, how I can support you best, maybe give you a reframe or a vibrational, more like a beacon, like a target, something that you can strive towards as you go through this process. And then we can just see how the conversation unfolds.
Okay. You know, I was just in Israel, so Noam's side of the family is there, and we were able to see family members that we've never met, and we had a beautiful time there. So everything is raw for us. We spent time with our good friends there. They hosted us so nicely. And then I work at a Jewish school for many years, so it's like this is all impactful to everyone. My father-in-law was part of the Yom Kippur War, and just in Yom Kippur, when we went to shul, he gave a big speech about it. So everything is just like so raw, so real, and I'm so confused because I'm here. I love to learn and I love to hear different people's perspectives, and I hear so many sides, and I'm just having a hard time knowing what's right, what's wrong. I see Noam, he's angry. He's emotional. He's constantly watching the news. But today he went to shul. He wanted me to go to shul, but I told him, no, I want to stay here. I want to make my call. I want to hear from you. But that's making him be more proactive and praying more. I don't know. Even though he's angry, I see his love for Israel coming out, and I'm just so confused. I'm so confused because and then my daughter, I know I'm saying a lot. I hope it makes sense. And then my daughter is telling me, Mommy, I'm hearing a lot of people say pro-Palestine. I'm Jewish. What does that mean? So, and then, I mean, I'm just a scatterbrain. So I hope you can follow what I'm trying to say. 3 weeks ago, I came a counter of the Zohar. I don't know why that got me started reading that, but I know that it said that there's a pattern with Israel and there is going to be another destruction of Israel. And then 2 weeks later, this happens. I'm like, okay. And then I came across something today. I'm so weird, but the Leo King of astrology saying how everything that happened in the wars in the past, the astrology lined up. And I remember you saying that too, that this is the, or something like that, that it's the same astrology for war. Oh, the baby's here. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking. She's
No,
so
it's
cute.
good.
Distract. Beautiful.
Cute.
Mm.
That's life. You see, you have something heavy, and then you see something beautiful. Like that's what I'm experiencing. Like I'm so confused. I don't know how to. I'm
So,
trying to be strong.
well,
And the other day, I melted down on a meditation. You know, I have a hard time meditating, but I came across a beautiful meditation. And then I just started crying so much, but it was beautiful. I'm just all over the place. I don't know how to control myself.
okay, so that's actually the last part of the conversation that I'll approach with you. That's the last part. So how it's up to you actually, unless you want it, you tell me. That's actually it's much better. I'll ask, which aspect of what you just shared do you want to start with?
I want to know how best to, because I, I trust that there's a reason for this, and I see that people are coming together, which is a beautiful thing. Was that when I was in Israel, I saw that a lot of people within Israel, because of the politics, they were fighting amongst themselves, and the local people were just not happy. They wanted to leave Israel, and I saw a lot of conflict between them. So in my mind, I'm trying to see, okay, like I told Noam, I said, I feel like this is forcing us to wake up and be united, because we have to be united, and we were not paying attention before. So something evil had to happen so that we can all wake up and be together. And that's what I'm seeing, like everybody coming together in my school. My chat is going crazy of how you can donate and this and that. And everybody's doing a beautiful job, even in my community. It's just so many good things are happening. I lost my thought. So I understand that maybe this is happening so we could all wake up, but at the same time, I'm having a hard time explaining to my kids that, like, just talking to them, how do I alleviate them? Like Friday was, I know I'm saying a lot, I'm sorry. Um, that Friday they said that there was a lot of threats in jihad and a lot of kids did not go to school. I wasn't afraid to send my kids to school, but I wanted to give them a peace of mind and make that decision. So they stayed home, but a lot of kids stayed home. So just things like that, I don't know how to help them and guide them. I don't know what to do.
So that's okay. So let's start with the simple one.
Okay.
And remember, as always, I don't know why I feel this inclination to disclaim my words. These are my beliefs. These are
You
my
always, you know.
these are my beliefs. They may have a resonance for you and you where you are in your journey, or they may not be appropriate. They may not feel right. You have to decide for yourself. For everything that I say, any perspective that I offer, it's always a matter of whether it feels right for you. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I should have probably taken notes on what you were sharing. I'll see
I
how
know
much.
I said a lot. I said a lot. That's my
Okay.
brain. That's my brain right now. I'm all over the place.
Okay. Well, maybe this is the right environment then, because we can really try to calm the mind and get a better handle on the thoughts. Okay. So if at any time in the conversation you feel a little bit anxious, just come back to your breath. Like literally, the breath enters and the breath exits. The breath enters, the breath exits. Follow the breath. Allow that to be your calming mechanism. Okay, so if the mind is racing all over the place, it's an indication that there's a lack of control within the human self. And there are things within the physical realm that will provoke that lack of control, which is oftentimes the stimulation coming off the screens, right? The fear, the thoughts that get carried away. Your best value to yourself and to others is to be in a state of control, not to be controlled, but to have control over your thoughts and feelings in some degree as this process moves along. It doesn't mean you won't have thoughts and feelings, but you're not your thoughts and feelings. It's the untethered soul being put to a test where you, Anna, in this moment get to choose, am I going to succumb to my overwhelming and confused thoughts and feelings? Or in this extreme moment, am I going to observe my thoughts and feelings and pave a healthy way forward?
I feel like I can control myself with my kids a little bit more, but when I'm with like by myself and here right now, like, I feel like I let loose.
Well, so
Like
it's possible that you need to let some of it out because it hasn't been properly reconciled. You don't have a handle on it. But even that process by which you feel that you need to let it out, it's still the true self able to observe that the human self has a need to let it out. There are two Annas. If it's helpful to see it that way, there are two Annas. There is the mind and the emotional self, and then there's the spiritual self. There are the endless thoughts in disarray and conflict. And then there is the patient present self, right? The human self and the spiritual self can grow harmonious. That's the spiritual journey that we're on. When the outside world is particularly unpredictable, it can hyperstimulate the mind. But it doesn't mean that you can't come back to the true self. You may need some practical adjustments where you go on a media fast for a day or two or a week or two. You may need to limit your dialogue, even if people around you feel the need to talk about it. You may need to be, for the most part, selfish in saying, I need just a little break. I need a day for myself. To find yourself in a state of just stillness, quiet, long walks on the beach, tranquility, whatever you have to do to strengthen the spiritual self, so that in this moment, the mind is not so rogue that it's causing you to lose control of your thoughts. I can tell you in a just a very big picture element, you'll need to pace yourself. If you blow out too early in this period for humanity, because too many things, the Israeli conflict is very real because of your Jewish heritage and the family and the Jewish school and the fact that you visited, all those details make it very real. At this stage, it's still happening thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away. It doesn't mean that you're not being affected by it, but it's not on your doorstep. The fear that everybody had of not going to school on Friday, it was a media provoked fear. There was one guy who said, let's go and have a crazy jihadi day on Friday. Nothing happened. But how many thousands of people were too scared to leave their homes? That's the battle that we find ourselves in. It is a battle for the strength of your mind.
so with that scenario, like I knew that nothing was gonna happen, right? And I knew that I could have sent my girls to school, but they don't have that not trust, but they don't have that trust that I knew nothing was going to happen. And that's the struggle because I can't have them. I don't want them to be in fear of going to school all the time when they hear something like that. And I just let them stay home because
But,
for peace of mind for them.
but you had a bomb threat in your school a few weeks ago.
Yeah,
It wasn't a Palestinian bomb threat.
no.
How many American kids have been threatened in their own schools over the last 20, 30 years? It had nothing to do with the war going on in the Middle East, which has been raging on and off for generations. There are threats, and some of them require your vigilance. But most threats, fortunately, do not amount to anything. The true threat is the threat of the mind, the way we feel about it. But this conversation, this is a deeper and more meaningful one. This is ultimately going to be your way forward. This right here, because you say, how can I help others? Well, it's to be that center of calm. It's the eye in the storm. It's the beacon of hope. It's the lighthouse that is helping those who are lost arrive at safe shores. A light unto the world, which is just to say that
chilled over. It's like from afar, like it's weird, like what I'm feeling right now, what you're saying to me.
Because the whole world could descend into a more chaotic space. The work that you've been doing is not to descend with them. That's your role. And it's Cricket's role, and it's Mike's role, and it's Chris's role, and it's anybody who's being called down a path where somehow, some way, they don't want to participate with the craziness around them, and they want to create a safe refuge. They want to create a space where people can feel safe. You're setting an example through your vibration, which in this case, the most important one is calm, patience, presence. Those high vibrational elements, there's different vibrations that you'll invoke at different points in the struggle. How many times did you read The Untethered Soul? And you read it with your daughter on the way to school. You're not your thoughts, darling. You're just having thoughts. Okay, well, Anna, you're not your thoughts. You're simply having them. And if you can't move away from your thoughts without them overwhelming you, move away from the stimuli that's provoking them. Move back into your center. Follow your breath. Find techniques that work for you to help you gain control over your thoughts and feelings. Because in that state of control, you become the beacon of hope. And you can make better decisions about the practical needs that are before you. Is it necessary to not go to school on Friday? Well, I'm clear-headed. I have control of my emotions. I'm focused. I'm in a good position to talk it through with my girls. As opposed to, the house is on fire. My hair is on fire. I can tell you, and I've been doing my best to kind of prep the group, we need to pace ourselves through these times. We're entering the hard years. There's more to come, and it's severe.
Is this all part of God's plan? Like this is for a reason?
So, okay, that's actually the other. So you had brought up a few points. So you had said, I'm trying to find the good in what's happening. So if you ask me, when it comes to war, death, destruction, killing, it's never necessary. And not only is it never necessary, but the good that comes of it didn't need the death and destruction to happen. The good could have happened if humanity was on a high vibrational path of awakening. And so the unfortunate patterns for humanity, right? And this is all biblical, this is also historical, is service to self, service to self, service to self, selfish desire, temptation, temptation, temptation. Society goes down a path of very individualistic, materialistic, selfish pursuits at the expense of others. It leads to conflict and suffering. Conflict and suffering get to be so great that it slingshots humanity back into another direction where they start calling for help. Calling for help. Eventually, the suffering gets to be so great that, and so many are collectively calling for help, that help arrives. It's the story that it repeats. Virtually every prophet in the Old Testament especially was moving down the same path. where they had to deliver messages to towns or cities that were misaligned because people were just hedonistic or selfish. And as prophets, they said, if you don't change your ways, bad shit's going to happen. And so Israel and Palestine is a classic example of selfish pursuits on both sides. It doesn't mean that people aren't suffering terribly now. It means that the suffering is happening because the vibration has been so low. How many years have they had opportunities to resolve their differences? The hatred for each other runs so deep. They don't really have a desire for many do, but those that are most in power, they have no desire for resolution. They would have found resolution if they desired it. And so can you say that there's good that's going to come out of this? Sure. The suffering could be so great that people say, no more. This is over. I'm not doing this anymore. We need help. We have to get rid of all those people that in any way are okay with killing. And humanity will slingshot the other way. But they have to get to a point where the suffering is so great that they arrive there, where the losses are so overwhelming. That's been the pattern for humanity. And it has been on sometimes it's it's a microcosm where it's two small communities. Sometimes it's a country or a continent. Sometimes it's a world war where tens of millions have to die and hundreds of millions displaced before finally it says no more. And so I think it's nice to say something good will come out of this. But I would also caution by saying that we don't need this for something good to happen. Okay, so if it helps you to see the positive, be like, hey, something good will come out of this at some point. Well, that's true. But the suffering is very real. And the thousands or tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands, 500,000, I think Ukrainians have died in the last 2 years. You never hear about that. 500,000. For what? Because there are powers that be that are being influenced by outside forces that thrive on war. So will good come of it? Yeah, probably at some point you'll be able to find some good. The state of Israel was formed because 6 million died in gas chambers in the war. And because the Holocaust was so egregious, the world through the United Nations was, except for the Arab world, was able to carve out a homeland for the Jews. And they've been in conflict ever since. Less more recently. They started to normalize relations with some of their Arab neighbors, Bahrain and UAE, on top of Jordan a number of years ago. They've made some progress in the region, but the Palestinian issue has always just been simmering under the surface. And so in this planet, unfortunately, violence is very much part of a third density sphere. And if there's unconsciousness, service to self, and low vibrational intentions, the suffering will continue until the suffering gets so great that it can't go on anymore. But with this conflict, we're not there. There's much more suffering to come with this conflict, I assure you.
I'm feeling too.
So that's why you have to pace yourself. That's why your journey is an inward journey, just as mine is inward, just as Cricket's is inward, just as anybody else who has the awareness of a path realizes that the path is within. And then the vibration which emanates outward starts to become a light unto the world, both because your thoughts, feelings, words, and actions are of high vibration, but also because you're actively emanating a vibration which is influencing the consciousness around you without doing or saying anything.
So what do I do in a situation when people are venting frustration and anger? How can do I stay silent? Like how can I calm that down so that
Well, your role is not always to calm it down. Sometimes, like where we started this conversation, you need to let a lot out. And so sometimes the role, within reason, you have to, it's one's intuition. I don't always do it great, to be frank, but you have to gauge how can you best be in service to the person in front of you. And so if they're hurt or they're suffering and they just need to vent, then you're the quiet listening ear. You let them vent. If they're emotional, maybe they need a hug. And you wait for the right opportunity to wrap your arms around them and just let them cry for a bit and you hold them there. If they're confused and they're on a spiritual path, you start to explore how they're not their thoughts. And that confusion is a weapon of war. So they've probably been deliberately confused. And anybody who gets into the history of the conflict, the conversation's already lost. Because the history is far too complex. There's a billion moving parts. The human mind can't grapple with all the variables. And you could be like, well, it was the Israeli land before it was the Palestinian land. Well, the Palestinians were there before the Jews showed up and they displaced all of them and they should have the right of retirement. It goes on and on and on. And people who go down that rabbit hole, they never pull out of it. It just fortifies their belief. Core to this entire conversation should be an anti-war sentiment, which is whatever we believe to be true, the killing, the death of innocents, and even the death of those who we decide to be not so innocent, it never leads to a peaceful resolution. Eventually you get to a point where you kill so many that there's nobody left to oppose you. And if if humanity's okay with that, then that's where like severe, well, nuclear weapons in most extreme cases, but that's where extreme destruction becomes justifiable. But if you're really truly on a path of just of sensibility, you start with an anti-war sentiment, which is not Israel's good, Palestinians are bad. You can say, well, Hamas is a terrorist organization. They desired to kill. That's bad. Be like, yeah, that's bad. That's bad. But if the Hamas is deliberately provoking Israel to create maximum suffering for the Palestinian people, and Israel responds by killing 10, 20, 30, 50,000 Palestinians, are we okay with that? Most of the Palestinians, I mean, are they supporting Hamas? Are they happy? Maybe some of them are happy that Hamas went and brutalized 1,300 innocent Israelis. But is the response to just go ahead and blow up half of Gaza? I don't know. It doesn't feel right to me. And so that's why.
What could be a solution to that?
Well, so these sort of political matters don't find easy solutions. But I can tell you that for starters, you have over 500 million Arabs living in and around the area. Right? You got 2 million Gazans, Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. You've got I think it's twice as many in the West Bank. The West Bank is relatively peaceful compared to Hamas and Gaza. The amount of money that is being put into war could easily financially incentivize most of the countries around them, as well as most of the Gazans, to find their own little pockets and make their way into these Arab lands. And some of them would go very quickly. Some of them wouldn't. But if that consciousness had been pervasive over the last few generations, you'd have a much, much smaller, much more manageable population in Gaza. And at some point, you would try to fold maybe Gaza into the West Bank. I don't know. I just know that as long as you keep traumatizing a population, like most of the Gazans would tell you that one or multiple relatives have either been hurt or killed at some point at the hands of the Israelis. And on top of it, their food, their water, their energy, that's all on a switch. And Israel chooses whether they get it or not, which is why it's been called the largest open air prison in the world. It's a tiny little strip of land and they're stuck there. So then you get this militant faction that says our goal is to destroy Israel at all costs. And the Palestinians, they're like, well, we kind of hate Israel and we feel like we're stuck in prison and nobody gives a shit about us. All right, let's try that. But then when it goes bad, which is like, okay, we had a big event, and now all of a sudden Israel's gonna absolutely pancake. They're gonna level Gaza. And it's a tiny little strip with 2.2 million people. The casualties will be mind-blowing. It doesn't feel like a solution. And to be frank, they've done this before. And this is where we've arrived. We're going to just do it again and do it again. And so that's why the discussion is best if there's a degree of neutrality to it. I don't support killing. I don't support enslavement. And so you can say, I'm Israeli, or I'm Jewish, or I have these identity qualities, but I feel for the suffering on both sides. Because now you're invoking the vibration of compassion.
I'm having a hard time seeing that, because like I can tell you, for my husband, he doesn't want to hear that. I mean, he knows that there's innocent people, but he's like, if Anna, they came in on our holiday and just had no regard for human life.
Yeah, how many came in?
I don't know the numbers.
It was 100, a couple hundred?
I
Okay,
don't know.
so there's 2.2 million. There's 2.2 million civilians within Gaza. And Israel will say, well, we're just going after the terrorists. But the last time I think they just went after the terrorists, there were like 20,000 civilian casualties. And Hamas knows this, so they shoot their rockets from the top of elementary schools or from the top of hospitals. And Israel sees the origination point for a rocket, and they just go and they flatten the structure. It is understandable that Noam or anybody else would be emotional and affected by what's happening because of the brutality and because of the suffering on the Israeli side, and the fact that that's the most protected border crossing on the planet. How Hamas was able to just drive right through.
That's another thing. Like, I don't understand that. It doesn't make
There were
any
like quite a few breach points, and apparently the Israelis that were military Israelis that were witnessing it had called in and said defenses are down, there's a breach, and the military didn't respond with the overwhelming force to prevent the militants from actually reaching civilian targets. And Hamas said they'd been planning it for over a year. And Israel said we had no knowledge of it. We didn't see it coming. We didn't know. We were caught by surprise.
It doesn't make sense. Something's not right.
Something is so not right with the whole story. Because now they're saying we know exactly where Hamas is, so we're going to go in there and just blow up all Hamas headquarters and targets and everything else. But we didn't know that they were planning this for the last year. We didn't see it coming. So we know exactly where they are and what they're doing, except for what just happened. And so then you start to realize the complexity of geopolitical events and how there's so many incentives that are not apparent to you, the media viewer, who is actively being manipulated for a cause. Because let's just say, hypothetically, Israel really wants to just completely obliterate Gaza and get rid of all 2.2 million in an act of just sheer brutality themselves. They could find justification, right? Netanyahu or the powers that be, to allow the Palestinian Hamas to come in for an attack, to brutalize 1,300 civilians and kill 1,300 and leave 2,000 dead, enrage the entire population, get some international support, not that they really care anymore, and then go ahead and obliterate a strip of land with 2.2 million undesirables. And they could say, yeah, we sacrificed a few thousand Israeli civilians so we could protect the country for generations to come by getting rid of these Gazans. And then you're like, would that really happen? And I can tell you with a high degree of confidence, that really happens. That way of thinking is rife. It is endemic within the political construct at a very senior level. The conflict in Syria was quite brutal. People already forgot about the civil war going on in Syria for all those years. all the refugees that poured out. There were some tapes that, because conversations at the senior levels are recorded. There was a Erdogan, which is the president of Turkey. He's a bit of a dictator himself, but he wanted to get involved in the conflict in Syria. And so it was like WikiLeaks. There was a tape that was a whole bunch of them, emails and tapes were, unauthorized release. And so there was a tape where Erdogan was on the call with the head of his military, and he says, how do we get involved in Syria? He's like, I want to get in there. Like, they're a threat. They're on our border. How do we get into Syria? And the head of the military or the Secret Service said, we'll send a few of our Turkish soldiers over onto the Syrian side, and they'll fire a couple missiles over to strike Turkish targets. And then we'll blame Syria for the attack. And that will give us justification to get into the war. It was just, then the tape got released, and the Turkish people are like, yeah, that's how it works. And then, of course, the media is used as a manipulation tool, because then those rockets get fired off, and all of a sudden it's like Syrian militants attempt to draw Turkey into the war. Innocent Turkish civilians have been killed by the Syrian army. Turkey's expected to respond with overwhelming force, whatever it is. That attack that happened, and by the way, I was traveling this week, and I was in a location where I didn't have internet access, and I was grateful for it. Because that attack that happened, I read about it and I heard about it after the fact. I was like, this doesn't make any. I've been along that border, that Gazan border. Like anything, like a pig moves along that border, there are like literally there are laser censored automatic sniper rifles that when something moves close to that fence, it just gets shot. On top of drones, on top of endless amounts of motion detecting cameras, on top of physical soldiers that are perched at every checkpoint. There are so many levels of redundancy that make it virtually impossible for anything to cross through there unless they want something to cross through. So to see these militants in their white pickup trucks driving right through.
Parachutes also? Like, what?
What's going on?
What could be an explanation for that? Like,
that's what I was just saying. Israel wanted it at some level.
oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Allow the conflict to happen, consciously sacrifice in the most brutal way with a lot of filming activity. Allow all of it to get uploaded and then even embellish it, get the media to go and make it seem horrible, the most brutal possible. And they were brutal, but they were trained. These kids are like teenagers that are trained to be as brutal as possible. And they're given free rein. Nobody opposed them. So Israel's like, allow the brutality, publish it to the world, and then we're going to go, and who knows what the objective is. Level Gaza, get rid of all Gazans. Maybe it's a wider war is wanted because the military complex is so profitable. That incursion made zero sense. To think that these kids driving their pickup truck and the paragliders and whatever else are able to just one day they're like, oh yeah, we'll just jump over the wall. It's like, no. And if you've ever been even close to that wall, it is unbelievable how impenetrable it is. But the media won't focus on that. The media will focus on the death and the need for retaliation and the outpouring of support and all the global conflict of the pro-Palestinian, pro-Jewish conflicts and how you can't trust your neighbor. You know, because if your neighbor's Palestinian, you're Jewish, like who knows what happens. In New York, there's a pro-Palestinian protest. They have to be kept away from the pro-Israeli protest because the divisiveness is a weapon of war as well, because we can't be conquered if we're united. It is a formula that has been used for a very long time to justify something horrible. And that's what's underway now, something horrible. But the people are the victims. The individual people who are unsuspecting, who are just going about their life, who are trying to care for their family and loved ones. Just like I think they won't tell you in the media, I think it's 500,000 Ukrainian civilians that have been killed. And the country's like leveled. You don't ever see images of the breadth of the destruction. The images, because it's all, the most of it's censored. And you never hear the Russian side of the story, how they were goaded into the conflict. All that's censored as well. You get a singular perspective intended to inflame and allow you to support the military complex, which has consumed tens of billions, or in the case of Ukraine, I think 134 billion taxpayer dollars to fight a war that the Ukrainians are losing badly, and to enrich those who run these military companies. War is good for business for somebody. And so that's the awakened mind. And that's why I say to you, care for yourself. Recognize you're being manipulated. Recognize that there are ulterior motives coursing through virtually everything you experience. You'll never figure out the breadth of the conflict, and you're certainly not going to resolve it. So do your best to elevate above it and emanate that loving vibration that is the Anna.
Like you can't trust anything. Like seeing that perspective, just like, wow, like it's crazy.
You see,
I never thought my
when
brain doesn't function like that.
the day that I know, because it's not part of you're not sinister. You're not sinister. This is sinister behavior. It has been going on for the longest time. When I first started to realize that this was happening, I started to go through history, and I was like, oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. A nation attacking itself to provoke an overwhelming military response. Oh, there it is. What? We want to curtail the rights of our citizens? Well, there it is. They think in terms of objective. And so then they create the crisis that allows them to move into that achievement. And so if the objective is a war with Iran, let's just say America and Israel has decided they want a war with Iran. Okay, so how do you get a war with Iran? Well, maybe this is an avenue to arrive there. Right? Israel is normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia, of all people. Saudi Arabia and Iran are complete enemies. And the Americans and the Iranians have been opposed now since the 70s, the Iranian Revolution. I don't know. I don't know what comes next. I just know that it's never as it appears. Never. Never. And if you and billions of others are just watching the corporate media or social media, they are manipulating your consciousness every single day. And they win if you're confused and angry and divided and emotional and your life is being impaired. That's a small victory on an individual level for them. Because if they can get the whole population, then they'll go ahead more likely to achieve their objectives. Welcome to the ascension. You came here for these times. This one just happened to hit close to home, but I had Ukrainian friends in New York. That one hit close to home to them. And when COVID happened, that one kind of hit close to home for all of us. You know, like, oh, lock them in their homes. It's not safe to go out. Close that small business. Keep those kids out of school. Make sure that they're scared and confused.
to keep my composure. You just
You,
keep
you can,
doing
you can.
and just be strong and supportive to the people around me, and that's all I
Well,
can.
be supportive in the way that you feel most appropriate to be supportive, and then look into the vibration that's coming out in the conversations. If somebody is full of hate because they're like, oh, I hate Hamas, I hate what's going on, and these people need to die, right? Recognize that the manipulation is probably at play and that their vibration is indicative of misaligned consciousness. It's a low vibrational self. It won't make things better. And they'll suffer in the process.
But I see a lot right now because what I'm surrounded by, you know.
I do. I do. And that's why you have all that you need inside to help you navigate these times. You're being put to the test now. It's, you can be grateful. You're given an opportunity to see how far you've come. Here it is. It's being laid out for you.
Like there's a calmness inside of me that I know everything's okay, but then I have these like weird emotions and confusion, but I don't know, it's weird feeling, but I'm calm. Like I don't know if that makes sense because I'm calm, but I'm not.
Well, so it makes sense in the context of there being two Annas.
Oh,
The true self is incredibly calm.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
The human self is the one that has her hair on fire.
Because I have, parents telling me, thank you for being you. And I sent half of my class went because they felt safe because I'm there and, the way I am and the way I make the kids feel safe, protected. Like, I'm just, so that kind of felt good, that they trust in me to send their kids because it's me. And what Chris said also, just like everything felt good, but I'm still confused.
Well, like I said, confusion is a weapon of war. And when confusion sets in, it usually means you're overexposed. And you can just come back to the most basic of ideals, which is killing feels bad. Killing feels wrong. Somewhere in there, I think I heard, thou shalt not kill. I don't know. Has any other Jew ever heard that? Somewhere in there, thou shalt not kill. It's got to be written somewhere. Let that be the starting point. And then they'll be like, well, what are we supposed to do? It's like, actually, you had a really well fortified fence that hadn't been breached in years. Yeah, there were rockets that they shot over, but they had that relatively under control. Something must have failed to allow for the breach of that wall, wouldn't you say? And it didn't just breach like a couple guys managed to dig under something. It breached like multiple points and trucks driving through with all the armament. I mean, it was a dramatic moment. Things are not as they appear. Things have never been as they appear in geopolitical conflicts, but they're certainly not as they appear in the modern era. There's an act of desperation unfolding by the force that I speak of, and they are pushing things to the absolute limit now. And it is going to intensify. For a while, I was trying to guess how it was going to intensify, and I was like humbled by it. I just knew that it was going to intensify.
I remember you saying that.
It will. That's why pace yourself. This conflict will intensify. That's a given. But the general theme that's governing planetary vibrations right now, the forces that need to keep us in a state of fear and locked down in an unconscious realm, need to push it to an absolute extreme to have a shot at remaining in power. And so they're pulling out all the stops. And the less people comply, the less people buy into it, the harder and further they have to push it, which ironically allows more and more people to wake up. I have a friend in New York who's been in, he's got Israeli roots, and he's been in the political space, the pro-Israel political fundraising, the whole nine. And he said to me, he's like, it is bizarre how much of this is happening, like boom, 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 boom. He's like, feels like there's too many coincidences. And I'm like, Super Jew Al Cohen, I'm like, you're making progress, buddy. Keep going. Keep going, Al Cohen. Because we're being used as pawns to be manipulated to help support a cause, which is ultimately not in the highest and greatest good of humanity. And so if you're confused and people are asking you to choose a side and you can't quite figure it out, and they want to talk about the history and the conflict and everything else, be like, you know what, guys, it's too complicated for me. I just feel like killing is wrong. There's something about thou shalt not kill that still resonates with me. I just don't want to see a lot of innocent people killed. Maybe as part of what's happening, the conversation should also be, and how can we prevent further killing? How can we minimize killing? How can we make sure this doesn't happen again? Shouldn't that be part of the dialogue? Before we go and throw billions of dollars at new weaponry, wouldn't the US say, and we really want to work towards a peaceful resolution as soon as possible? Wouldn't you expect that as part of the discussion? I'm not saying that it's easy to arrive at a peaceful resolution. I'm just saying you would expect that to be part of the conversation if people were really intended on resolving this. So I think you have a sense of my perspective on it now.
It helped. It's really good. Thank you.
So you'll navigate these waters. We'll be here to support you. Chris's email was beautiful. Welcome.
Yeah. Chris, I didn't respond, and I read it, and actually, I promise you, that gave me courage so much in so many ways. So thank you. Like, I never responded because I'm a chicken without a head, but thank you. That really helped me so much. Your words were very powerful to me, and it just gave me that drive to keep going, be strong, and I don't know. Thank you. Thank you. Well, everybody.
I didn't really have to think about it. It just kind of came from the heart, and that's how I feel about it. So I'm glad it was helpful.
It's the way I feel about it too. It's the same. The difference is, we've spoken of this before. There's a spectrum whereby some of us exist in the very intimate individual space where we connect profoundly with the suffering of the individual. Some of us are elevated and designed to see things through the bigger lens and a broader picture, and we can largely stay in a greater perspective, right? So Chris is well wired for a greater perspective way of, it doesn't mean that he doesn't feel bad when he knows of thousands of people suffering. He doesn't get called into the individual plights. He doesn't get called down into that space. He's able to reframe it and see bigger picture, right? I always said, and I oscillate a little bit, but I spent a lot of time feeling into the pain. I can empathically feel into the pain and suffering of the individual. And so that's why I'm careful. And like, we've had these calls, I always feel into what I'm experiencing, but also when I'm seeing the imagery, I know a lot of it is real and the suffering is very real, and I get affected by it. And it interferes with my ability to see big picture. And so that's why I go through media fasts or just completely break away from my screen sometimes for long periods, so that I can exist more profoundly in the spiritual perspective of what's happening planetarily and invoke the vibration that's necessary to move through the difficult times. Okay, because it's so personal and intimate for what's happening based on your trip and your family and all the other details we spoke of, be conscientious if you get called too deeply down into this space. Because if the emotions start to overwhelm you, it's usually an indication that you need greater balance. That's the spectrum, if you want to think of it in these terms. And the people that are media obsessed, they're almost always called right down into the nitty-gritty details, and they're manipulated.
I don't watch the news much. Noam does, but lately, I mean, I always have a book on my, before I go to bed, I put a YouTube or I'm always busy with spiritual stuff, but I've noticed that before this started, even more so, like, but a little bit of everything. I'm like, this is the weird part for me. Like, I go from the Zohar to the Tether Soul to this to that. I'm all over the place, but it works for me because I like it. It helps.
And you are Aryan. The Aries energy is notorious for starting and not finishing.
That is me. I haven't finished one book. I have like 20 open.
And
But that works for me. It helps. I don't. It's weird.
I'm Capricornian. I am literally the opposite. If I still have to make a certain commitment, I have to get to a certain point within the literature, but when the commitment is affirmed, there will be very little that will prevent me from finishing it.
I wish I could be that way.
They're
I'm
just
not.
different. They're different instructions for different reasons. I'm speaking of the human self. Whenever you speak of an astrological placement, that's just human expression, which means that what you're describing, it's cultural. It could be based on life experiences, but it also could be just your astrology, which is showing itself in this capacity. And if that's happening, it just happens to be the wiring or the personal instructions that your physical self took on for the incarnation. It helps you in other ways. Put it to you that way. It helps you in other ways. Sometimes it's good to get in, get out, get in, get out. I've notoriously been overcommitted to things that weren't serving me. And I was like, no, I've got to be determined. I got to get to the end of it. It's like, well, why? Well, I committed to it. It's like, yeah, let it go. And so that's why we all find our point of harmony, balance.
Well, thank you for this. It's definitely been very, 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 very helpful. I was looking forward to this call. Worked out perfectly.
Pleasure. Okay. Cricket, Chris, speak now
Hey.
or forever hold your peace. What's that?
Go ahead, Cricket. I'm late to the party.
You'd
Yeah.
actually enjoy probably the first part of the conversation.
I'll watch the recording.
Yeah, this is the perspective. The
Yeah.
relevancy. I know your interests. This might overlap with some of them. They are highly trepidatious times. It's okay to be scared. Like, it's okay to have these emotions. That's the other thing, Anna. It's all okay. You have tools that you can come back to, but it's okay if you feel overwhelmed or confused. It's okay if you're emotional. It's okay if the people around you are emotional. It's part of the process. Grief is very real, and it's very hard to say there's a good way to grieve. People are dying. It is hard to experience that without feeling something profound, especially when you feel very close and connected to it. So that's always, I don't always say it, that's always part of this conversation. It's all okay, whatever's coming up for you. You can choose a different way forward. You can invoke your spiritual perspective. You can lean on the tools that you've developed over the years. And if you're successful in doing that, mazel tov, you've accomplished it. And if you're not, that's okay. Because the vibration of acceptance and understanding is much more likely to lead you to a better place than the consciousness that says you have to do something different. The people that are certain they have to change, they never end up changing. They overwhelm themselves. Okay, so all of it starts with an acceptance of where you've arrived and what you're experiencing and how life is unfolding. And in that calm center of self-love and understanding, then you're in a position to invoke change. Come back to this portion of the conversation if you need to. Okay, I give you a big hug from here.
Thank you. I feel it.
You're getting a big group hug, I feel like.
Oh, Anna.
Thank you. Sending you right back.